everyone, and thank you for tuning in to this new episode of BEaTS Research Radio, a podcast and YouTube channel that aims to disseminate science and research to the community. My name is Jinane, a master's student in biochemistry at the University of Ottawa, and I will be your host on today's episode, which will be part of an episode series that will explore the impact of exercise on our health. We are honored to be joined today by Dr. Martin Gibala, a professor of kinesiology at McMaster University. Dr. Gibala's research examines the effects of exercise at the molecular to whole body level in both healthy individuals and people with chronic diseases. So, on top of the basic mechanistic studies looking at the regulation of skeletal muscle energy, metabolism, Dr. Gibala's laboratory focuses on applied research that examines the impact of physical training and nutrition on human health. Beyond his research, Dr. Gibala is the recipient of 3 awards of teaching excellence at McMaster University, as well as the President's Award of Excellence in Graduate Study Supervision. Dr. Gibala also recently published a book on high-intensity training entitled The 1 Minute Workout: Science Shows a Way to Get Fit That's Smarter, Faster, and Shorter. In addition to his research, Dr. Gibala is a dedicated educator who is passionate about training the next generation of kinesiologists, where he teaches courses about exercise and metabolism, integrative physiology of human performance, among others. So, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Gibala, to share your expertise and insights on the latest development in your field.
Thanks for having me.
So, we like to start by asking our guests to tell us a little bit more about themselves. So, what inspired you to pursue the career you presently have today? And why did you choose to study kinesiology and research the effect of certain types of exercises on human health?
Sure. So I think students get interested in kinesiology for lots of different reasons. When I first got into the field, a lot of students were still interested in sports or they came from some sort of sporting background. And so, personally, for me, I was interested in the field for learning about how knowledge of exercise and nutrition could maybe help make me a better athlete. I was just a middling athlete, so I needed all the help that I could get. And when I first got into the field of kinesiology, I was really fascinated by the area of physiology, and I took a second year course, which really inspired me. And so I was trying to combine those two interests or passions of exercise performance with the underlying basic mechanisms for what might be happening inside my body from a physiological perspective.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So, by now we know that you researched the benefits of HIIT workouts, for example, and 1 minute interval training based on all the publications that you've had in the past couple years. So, can you first briefly explain your research on that and some of the key findings of your work?
Yeah, probably if I could boil it down, we've really come to understand that brief, vigorous, intermittent physical activity can be a very potent way to enhance our health and fitness. And so much of our research has been on that broad theme. And so the title of my book, The 1 Minute Workout, really it comes from research that we've been doing that's looking at as little as 3 20-second hard bursts of exercise within a time commitment of about 10 minutes, and showing that even small amount of exercise can still be beneficial in terms of improving things like your cardiorespiratory fitness, which is a good global metric of your heart, lung, muscle function. And we know it's really related to your risk of dying from all causes or developing many chronic diseases. And we've also been interested in the basic mechanisms. So, what at the molecular level is changing when we do this type of exercise, and how might that underlie the health and fitness changes that we're seeing? And I think over time, our research has it started out with what we call small proof of concept studies, basic mechanistic work. And now it's progressed. We're doing some randomized, controlled, multi-center trials, looking at something that we've termed exercise snacks. So this idea of very brief bouts of exercise, even spread throughout the day. And I was involved with some collaborative work showing that even a few minutes a day of vigorous intermittent physical activity, you can imagine climbing the stairs or carrying a heavy backpack after you get off a flight or you're going to the subway. That type of vigorous physical activity, even accumulating a few minutes of that a day, was associated with a real marked reduction in all cause mortality. And so we're following that work up now.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting because first and foremost, we have to look at the effect of exercise on human health before we look at the way it shapes our body or the way we look after a certain time of doing some exercises. So maybe as a follow-up question, what are some of the mistakes that people do while training in this time of age? So, as you know, there are so many fitness enthusiasts on social media platforms, YouTube and Instagram, and so many conflicting ideas here and there that confuses a lot of people. So, how can people pinpoint exactly what they need to get out of their exercises and training? So, what do
Yeah.
they aim for?
Sure. And so I think ideally people should be achieving the physical activity guidelines. And so Canada now has 24-hour movement guidelines. And within that, the suggestion to do 150 minutes a week of moderate to vigorous physical activity. That's about 2.5 hours. It sounds quite daunting, but it's really only a few percentage points of the total time available in your week. And
Yeah.
so I think much like dietary advice that the government gives us, those are the things that we should be striving for. But we know that many people feel very time pressed, whether that's an excuse or whether that's actually true for a lot of people, we could debate. But when it comes to this idea of high intensity interval training or particularly vigorous exercise, I think a common misperception I see is that people think this only means all out, as hard as you can go, gut busting type exercise. So you need to get on a bike and pedal your heart out at a 10 out of 10 pace. That type of training can be very effective, but we also know it's extremely unpleasant for the vast majority of people. And it might be contraindicated or not suited for many individuals as well. And so we like to remind people that interval training, first of all, is just intermittent physical activity. And when we talk high intensity, that really means getting into the vigorous zone. And so that means a 7 or 8 on a 10-point scale. Or it's, if we use what's called the talk test, you wouldn't want to carry on a conversation like we're having right now, but you could spit out a few words. So that's the type of intensity we're talking about, but it doesn't mean all out maximal. And also, when we frame it that way, high intensity interval training can very much fit within our current physical activity guidelines if we consider that really it just means vigorous intensity exercise. It doesn't mean an all out sprint as hard as you can go.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on weightlifting? Like people who weightlift and progressively follow the progressive overload technique in weightlifting.
Yeah, so I was focused on the aerobic physical activity guidelines there, and of course we should be doing resistance training as well. And so the recommendation is typically, at least 2 resistance training sessions a week. And so whether that's traditional weightlifting exercise, whether that's body weight style exercise, we should be doing that. And definitely body weight style interval training, it can count as HIIT, and it's sort of a middle ground, if you will, where if you do body weight exercise, thinking things like burpees or
Mhm.
lunges or mountain climbers, things like that, if we keep the recovery periods quite short, we can have the cardiovascular stimulus to get the aerobic conditioning while also simultaneously getting strength benefits as well. Now, it's not as good as traditional endurance training. It's not as good as traditional weightlifting exercise, but it's a pretty good middle ground. It can be highly effective, even if the time commitment overall is quite low.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very good point. So would you say it's easy for people to structure their workouts or their training with, their lifestyle, this lifestyle that we're living with their work and everything, or do you think it's more complicated than what we think?
I think we can often make it complicated, but especially on the time pressed, we can really come back to the basic, simple things. And so it doesn't need to be complicated at all. And so I think the biggest thing is ideally find something you like and enjoy because you're most likely to stick with it. And sounds very simple, but we know that people are most likely to stick with a program that they find that they like and enjoy. So that's probably the biggest one. Consistency is the key,
Mm.
rather than the specifics of exactly what you're doing. And also, I think for many people, exercise is this special thing that we do in a special place after we change into special clothes, and it doesn't need to be that at all. Exercise is really just a type of structured physical activity, and we can be physically active active without having to go to the gym. Again, these simple body weight style exercises, using the stairs, climbing hills, working physical activity into our activities of daily living, and huffing and puffing once in a while regularly as we go about our day. We need to remember that that's a good thing for us.
Yeah, definitely. Uh, when you were talking about your research, so many questions came up in my brain that I'd like to ask you about. So, for example, gender or sex differences in your research, studying this type of training. Have you looked at that? And also age. What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, we have certainly biological sex can have a modulating influence, but probably it's not as great as just inter-individual differences. So there's huge inter-individual differences in training responsiveness. That remains an active area of investigation, and so I think biological sex can have some subtle influences, but clearly many people can benefit from different types of training, and we're not at the point where we could say, well, if you're a biological male or you identify as a woman, for example, you should be particularly training in this way, where the field's not at that level yet, certainly because probably these influences are quite subtle. When it comes to aging, definitely, number one, people need to be smart, and so engaging in all-out high-intensity exercise, especially very impactful exercise, is probably not a great idea as people get older, and even you get to my age and you start to have some knees and joints that don't feel as great when you load them very, very hard. But if we look at the guidelines, older Canadians, 65 and older, are encouraged to do moderate to vigorous intensity exercise, and then encouraged to engage in resistance exercise as well. And so I don't think that the general advice markedly changes as we age, but particularly the specific types of exercise that we do may change a little bit. But I think we need to remember we're never too old to start to get the benefits of physical activity.
Yeah, that's a very good point as well. So, are there any challenges that you face working in this field in your research or in the field in general?
Yeah, probably like any scientist, funding is always a challenge. And so you often think you have very good ideas and you don't get the grant for that idea. So, that remains an ongoing challenge. And in a lot of ways, I think many professors at Canadian universities, it really feels like you're running a small business, right? You have to generate revenue. You have to manage human resources, especially communication. You have to market yourself in order to try and attract the funding. So those, I think, would be generic challenges that we face, particularly in the field of high intensity interval training. I think, currently we see a bit of a backlash against high intensity interval training, and some of that's fair, and I think some of it's unfair. The fair criticism is around sometimes there's been overstatement around the potential benefits of interval training, and so the field generally has to check itself a little bit and not let the hype get beyond what the evidence suggests. Like, again, a lot of areas of science, studies often start out small, and the first studies that we do are not randomized controlled trials. And so sometimes the level or quality of evidence is not where we would like to see it. And so criticisms of that nature, I think, are entirely fair. But we also see, of course, a lot of yelling on social media and just try to avoid that sort of stuff. I think some people just generally dislike the notion that high intensity interval training might be an effective public health strategy. But I think what they miss is that, well, what we've been telling people to do for a long time, a lot of people aren't listening to that either. And so we're not sort of trying to frame this as interval versus traditional cardio and which is better. We like to think of we're trying to expand the movement menu, just like diet. We give people more options to choose from, and then they're able to tailor accordingly for what they like. But we have to make sure that's grounded in good science, and so we're trying to establish the basics, and then people can look at how the best way to apply that and potentially to get people to take it up and adhere to it.
Yeah, exactly. It definitely helps for people to listen from scientists first before anything else. So, we're very excited to read more about your research in the coming years, but shifting gears a little bit, what would be your advice to students interested in pursuing a career in the field of kinesiology and exercise health? So, yeah, maybe you can start
Yeah,
with. I have a follow-up question as well.
Yeah, sure. So I think generally, follow what you're interested in, right? And so, I think the field of kinesiology is extremely broad. By definition, it's an interdisciplinary field. I study physiology, but some of my colleagues study neuroscience or health behavior or ergonomics or motor control. And so it's a very, very diverse field. But what links us is an interest in physical activity and how that can promote health. So I would encourage students to get into the field if they're potentially interested, and know that, like a lot of fields, they can diversify, but it's a particularly interdisciplinary field, and it can offer something for everyone. I think if you're fundamentally interested in the links between biology and health, and potential applications.
Yeah. So is it mostly focused on working in academia, or are there more job opportunities for people who are in the fields?
It's not at all about just working in academia, and I think certainly at the graduate level, that's something that we're mindful of. Maybe 1 in 5 PhD graduates in Canada are going to progress to a traditional university faculty position, and so I think we're quite mindful of that. That a lot of students may go into industry or may go into, if we look at the demographics, we have an aging population clearly, and so I think a lot of um, kinesiology graduates could potentially be attractive to many different potential stakeholders who might be interested in strategies to enhance healthy aging. And so, some of my own students have gone on to fields quite diverse, where they're working more in industry or allied health fields, as opposed to having traditional academic appointments.
Okay. And maybe my last question would be, what is not known about this field that maybe you can share with the audience? So, what is something that people don't know about kinesiology or health and fitness until they get into that field? And
Yeah, and so I think kinesiology, it's really just the study of human movement in all its forms. And so I think some people think that kinesiology, getting back to the first question, it's only about sport, or it's only about athletics, and it's only about very specific applications to athletes. Whereas again, if we take a step back and think about human movement, again, that could be what are the neurological control of human movement, and how does that relate to movement disorders such as Parkinson's? Or if we think about movement, repetitive moving in an industry setting, that's a field of ergonomics, right? And so why do workers get hurt on the job, and what are strategies that we can change to try and reduce their risk of injury? And so I think people hear kinesiology, they think very applied to sport and athletics, but the field is much more broad than that.
that's very interesting. Thank you so much, Dr. Gibala, and thank you for being here with us and sharing all of your expertise. And this was a very enlightening conversation. I really appreciate you being here. And also, I'd like to thank all of the BEaTS Research Radio listeners for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram channels at BEaTS Research. And on behalf of the entire radio team and our director, Dr. Emilio Alarcon, we hope to see you all in the next episode.